Everything you need to know about box squats. First thing I'm going to talk about is the box height. Now, you may want to choose a higher or lower box height to target a specific point in the squat. In this case, if Liam goes down, I know versus Liam's regular full depth squatting, this is probably about the halfway mark. He may want to actually just target this range, but the general rule here is that we always must stay within our active range. Easy way to look at that is as long as we are maintaining lumbar tension of spine, that's one key part. And then there's a couple of key points of performance we're looking at the lower body. Things like knees tracking over toes, feet staying in contact with the floor, making sure that those things are met with the squat are going to be good ways to ensure you're staying within your active range in the squat. Let's talk about the next one, dead stop or regular. So if Liam shows us a dead stop, essentially this is where we come down to the bench, we stop entirely and then we come back up again. Now there are a few variations of the dead stop we can use. We can use one variation where we sit down to the bench, we kind of rock back ever so slightly and drive up. Now what this is essentially doing is creating momentum with the lift. When we create momentum, essentially we're getting like a running start into lift. That's going to be generally going to be an easier type of squat and there's going to be less demand on things like the glutes and the hips and the quads to execute the lift. If we did the same dead stop squat, but we took out momentum now, essentially we're kind of working on starting strength here, but we want to make sure we're maintaining tension, we're not going into a complete relaxed position here, and then we're asking all the tissues involved to then have to fire up and execute the lift. So execution with momentum has its pros and cons. Execution without momentum has its pros and cons as well. Of course, with the dead stop, you also then can apply the appropriate box height relative to your active range and what you're actually trying to target within the squat. The next one we could do is just a regular squat where we're squatting to a bench. In this case, we're essentially using a bench or the box as a depth gauge. So for some people, we just want to know or have something like a box to tell us when we should then start initiating back into the concentric. So if Liam was to execute this, he would essentially, as soon as he'd touch that box, he'd come back up again. So there's no pausing now. One more, Liam. So essentially, this is executed pretty much the exact same way we would execute a squat without the box. We're just looking for the tactile feedback of the box. The next question is quads versus hips. A lot of us think that a box squat needs to be executed with a really wide stance. It does not have to be that way. Generally speaking, we know that the wider we go with our legs or our feet, the more we're going to demand of the hips. So generally the adductors and the glutes being the primary contributors there. So if Liam takes a wide stance and he comes back down here, let's say we're executing a dead stop squat. So in this bottom position, now the adductors are in tension and the glutes are working for sure. As he executes it, he comes back up. Now, if Liam was to bring his feet into a narrower stance and allowed his knees to track over his toes more, we're still performing a box squat, but we're now emphasizing the quads in the repetition. So regardless of what you want to target will be dictated by where your feet are placed. The second thing we can actually do, which is an advantage of having a bench, is we can actually sit the hips essentially further back than we would normally sit them when performing a squat. So if Liam performs a squat and he's really moving his hips backwards, we're almost to the point where if I was to take away the bench, he would almost fall down. This is going to allow us to really drive even more attention towards the glutes and the abductors by leaning forward even more, creating more hip flexion.